Final topic, kids off Nauru. Now, this has been something that's really dominated the headlines in recent weeks. That is that the final 4 children are actually being sent to America. So there's no children on Nauru anymore. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said we've got all the children Labor put in detention centres out, and we have shut down all the detention centres Labor opened, including Christmas Island. It's a partisan statement, I know, but the spirit of that statement is actually true. And there's, some important facts which I think I can contribute to this area, whilst being cautious at the same time. I've taken an interest in this since I became Managing Director at ACL in February last year, and pursued a lot of information about the circumstances prevailing. And here's some things. First of all, asylum seekers on Manus and Nauru have never been without options. There are several, and I'll start with I'll go in order of attractiveness. The first one is return to their home country. Now, that's not ideal for most who are assessed as genuine refugees. So that's something that's not open to everyone, but it's an option. You don't have to stay in detention. If you're not a genuine refugee, you can go back. Or anyone can go back, actually. If it becomes safe, you can go back. But further, there's the option to resettle with their families, bring their families as well, in Papua New Guinea, and in many cases Nauru as well. And they will receive support services to help them to find housing and find work and get set up with life in a place that is peaceful, in a place where it is possible to be successful and to live comfortably. That is an option that's open and that has been taken up by many. Another one is to put their hand up for assessment to go to the United States of America, which is a really very attractive option, which is available to many and has been taken up by many and remains available to many who are still in detention. But 72, I think it was, actually refused this option, which is confusing because if somebody is in a desperate circumstance, you would take up such an offer of a first world country to live in that is peaceful and free and all the rest of it, but they rejected it because, of course, they want to come to Australia, but it means that they're willing to wait to see if that can happen. Or if they're unable to go to the USA, there's usually been a third country that they've been able to go to. And that was Cambodia for a time. I'm not sure where the Cambodian thing is at the moment, but again, it's safe, it's free, and they can have a good life there, especially with the support services being offered, which actually means that if somebody wasn't able to go to the US, they've always got something they can do. But also, there's options, for one thing. Secondly, they're not in torturous conditions. I've satisfied myself of that. There's pictures often of children behind wire fences and saying, kids in detention. That's very misleading. They're not behind wire fences and they're not in detention. They're living free in community in PNG or Nauru. Nauru in particular, you've got people who have integrated into the community, who have bought local businesses, who have children. Some have got married. Some have been authorised to go on holiday to Fiji and things like this. They are living free lives. They're getting educated there and all the rest of it. They're not in detention. They're not behind wire. Let's get that straight. In fact, that's been the case for some time. I'm a late comer to this, though, in the early days. It may well have been that there was madness and that conditions were not great. But they were very challenging times, and it's in the past. I've not been there. Challenging times because of the overcrowding and all the madness that was going on with the people flowing in and all the rest of it. But what about medical care? A lot of money is invested in medical care. Again, I've questioned and I've found out information about this. I can't share it all, but the fact is that medical care of high quality is available and on standby all the time. I am, for example, aware that there's many children who have been taken off Nauru by private jet at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars with their families because they haven't eaten for a few days, for example. Maybe their blood glucose has dropped a bit for that reason. The whole family gets brought to Australia, and as soon as they land, lawyers lodge injunctions to stop them ever going back, and they never do. And lots of families have come to Australia by coordinating that kind of activity. And the medical care has always been given and been given quickly. And I've also spoken to people who are aware of Nauruan children who have not gotten medical care quickly enough from countries like Australia recently and have therefore gone blind from complications and other horrible things have happened to them. And meanwhile, private jets are ferrying in and out for the refugees. Now, I'm not denying anybody good medical care. I'm just saying that medical care is well funded and it exists. Now, there's that. But also, we need to remember 50,000 people arrived on 800 boats. It's big. At least 1,200 died at sea. There were 220 children offshore in 1992 and 220 children offshore and 1,992 on the Australian mainland. That figure is now 0. 19 detention centres have been closed. That's all progress. That's all humanitarian progress. There's about 1,000 asylum seekers currently remaining on Manus and Nauru with the options that I described. And that number is dwindling, and it's dwindling at a reasonable rate as well. It's steady, but it's not very, very slow. It's actually quite a pace. The problem is this, and I understand it entirely, they have an unmet expectation of coming to Australia. Those who have been waiting and waiting and waiting in hope have been waiting for 5 years or so. I understand that. It's not nice. It's not an ideal circumstance. I can understand the pain. I can understand the fact that it is frustrating. And I can understand the fact that it becomes hopeless because they want to come here and they're not here. That's the unmet expectation. Many of them are genuine refugees. I will say that. So I'm not saying they should go back. Many of them are genuine refugees and they want to come here. Look, that's where things are at. That's where things are. I feel people don't know a lot of those facts. But related to this is the Phelps Bill. Kerryn Phelps wants to introduce this bill, which you will have seen in the press, and there was much debate, and it only just got blocked at the end of last year. She wants to introduce a bill in a couple of weeks, or next week in Parliament, that says that these people, any of these 1,000 asylum seekers, can come to Australia on the say-so of 2 doctors. If the doctors sign off and say that, yes, they have medical concerns and the treatment being provided them is inadequate. The Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, will have 24 hours to approve that. He's only able to say no if he has legitimate national security concerns, and if he does say no, it then gets referred to a panel, a committee, which has to review it again within 24 hours. So he can't just say no all the time. He's got to be, honest and say, okay, I've received medical expert opinion, that's all I've got. And this is deadlocked in the lower house. It's passed the Senate. But in the lower house, it's got 74 votes for and 74 votes against. And Cathy McGowan, the independent from Indi, is the one with whomever she sides, it will pass or not pass. And if the bill passes, it will be a vote of no confidence in the government. Because this is a core piece of government policy. And if the bill doesn't pass the lower house, there'll be a snap election. But let's talk about the problem of this bill for a second, because there are problems. ACO actually briefed the government and said that the 1,000 asylum seekers still on Manus or Nauru would come to Australia within weeks of the bill passing. And you say, well, how is that possible? Well, you know what? I don't want to cast aspersions against people, but I will tell you the truth. There are people out there with medical degrees who are practicing medicine who will sign off on bringing these people to Australia, whether they're sick or not. And I can tell you that because I was actually in a pretty significant refugee event where a very prominent leader in this area, a very prominent leader, well-known and with huge connections and significant power, looked at the audience and with a smile said, I guarantee you that I will find 2 doctors for every single one of the people on Manus and Nauru to sign off their transfer to Australia tomorrow if this bill passes. And so that is actually the plan, and that's why ASIO would say such a thing. Now, doctors are great people, and very few would do that, but there are those out there who are activists that will. And you say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the government is saying that it's because you will return quickly to the circumstances we had before, which is 50,000 arriving by boat in a very short period of time, 1,200 actually dead in the water, and people smuggling and the trading in human misery and human lives will start again. Now, you can say that that's all rhetoric. I'm prepared to accept that that is probably true. Probably true. I'm prepared to accept that there's a very real risk of that because of the movement of asylum seekers around the world. There's so much of it, and because of the issue with the displaced persons and boats and all the rest of it, which is now a global issue. And because of the 2013 experience when Kevin Rudd changed the policy and all this happened, we've seen it before. I'm prepared to accept that there's a very real and material risk that we'll go back to square one. And I am in touch with people who know their business on this, and they're not partisan types, they're thoughtful types, and they say that if we lose control again, they are highly doubtful, and I know the government's in possession of advice to this effect, highly, highly doubtful that we'll be able to get it back. That probably will be the nail in the coffin, and the overwhelming problem will recommence. There's security issues with that. There's loss of borders issues. And to be honest, there's chaos, there's people smuggling, there's the drownings. We can be humane. We really can. But we can also be wise. I understand the situation as it prevails is not ideal. There is no ideal situation here. But the rhetoric that's been put out there is often misleading. And the Phelps Bill is put forward not by people who are just concerned about the 1,000 people who are on Manus and Nauru and to meet that unmet expectation of bringing them to Australia. The Phelps Bill is put up by people who don't believe in national sovereignty and who don't believe in borders, and they hate the fact that there is any policy on this at all, and they're trying to dismantle it. And I don't think we should be so naive as to think that there's anything else at play here, because that is what is actually at play. Borders are legitimate. God sets the times and the dwelling places of the nations. I'm quite sure that nations and national sovereignty is real, and ever since Babel there has been the need for nation states. But I do believe, as much as I believe in borders, I do believe in generosity, and I think we should have a very, very generous humanitarian program to back up strong borders so that we can choose the most needy and the most vulnerable, and we can be good to them, we can give them a home, and we can prevent all the suffering with the drownings and all the suffering with the processing of asylum seekers, but we can actually allow genuine refugees to come to Australia in far greater numbers than we otherwise could. We should do that, and we should keep pressure on the government to do that. But most of all, I believe in wisdom, and let me close with this. You know, wisdom is a very vital Christian virtue. It is as vital as compassion or anything else. And you know, when Solomon came to government, Solomon, the wisest man, Solomon, came to government as a king, he prayed for wisdom first and foremost. Why? He said, so that I might discern what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong. And we live in a fallen world, and the dynamic is such that we can do things that look in the moment to be good and right, but they can actually lead to hurt and harm and destruction. But we can also do things that are firm and harsh, but that actually are for good. And governments always have this problem. Governments always have to walk this line, and it's a formidably difficult line, which is why Solomon said, how am I to govern this great people of yours? He says to God, give me wisdom that I might know the difference. And you know, there's examples like when he goes to cut a baby in half. There's nothing compassionate to that woman in that moment about saying, I'm going to cut your baby and raising a sword over your head and all the rest of it. Someone in that group thought was in imminent fear of the baby dying. But it was very wise. It was very wise because right was done and a good outcome came. And I think we should pursue that. And I think that we should make sure that we try and walk that line at all times of saying, you know what, this is a fallen world, so let's be wise. And in our wisdom, let's try and do that which is ultimately right and good, and also that which is compassionate. Do good, be wise. That's my closing comment. I'm not a mouthpiece for any government, and I never will be, but I understand the wisdom of what's going on in all the things that I have just described, and I am concerned about those who perpetuate untruths to try and undermine it. You may disagree with me on the details, that's fine, because as I said, there's no perfect place on this one, but we must not only want to do good and be compassionate, but wisdom must prevail in all things.